When U.S. Congressman Adam Schiff belittled Ibrahim Traoré by calling him uneducated, the room grew tense. But what happened next shocked everyone. Traoré, calm and unshaken, responded with a powerful story that silenced critics and revealed the true depth of his wisdom and leadership. This unforgettable moment is now going viral worldwide. The conference hall in Geneva was packed. Leaders, diplomats, and journalists sat shoulder to shoulder. The air was already heavy with tension, but it became unbearable when Congressman Adam Schiff leaned into the microphone. With a smirk, he said, "Mr. Trout, some here wonder how a man with so little formal education can sit among us to discuss matters of global policy." A ripple of unease swept the room. Some gasped. Others exchanged nervous glances. Cameras zoomed in on Ibrahim Traoré, president of the transition of Burkina Faso. He did not flinch. He did not blink. His calmness was unsettling. Schiff expected anger or embarrassment, but Traoré's stillness felt like a storm gathering quietly over the desert. The moderator tried to intervene, but the silence was louder than any gavel. The world was watching. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for Traoré's response. Instead of rushing, he reached for a glass of water, took a slow sip, and looked Schiff directly in the eye. His lips curved into the faintest smile. The room braced itself. Something unforgettable was about to happen. Traoré set down the glass, his hand steady. His voice when he spoke was soft, yet it carried across the hall like thunder rolling in a valley. "Congressman," he began, "education is not only what is written on paper. A degree can teach facts, but life teaches truth." Murmurs stirred. Schiff shifted uncomfortably, but Traoré was not finished. He paused, scanning the room. His gaze fell on the faces of young African students who had been invited to witness the summit. Their eyes glistened with anticipation. "In my village," Traoré continued, "children learned under a tree with no books and no chalkboards. Yet from those children came doctors, engineers, and soldiers who defend their people. Tell me, sir, who is uneducated? The man who studies from the soil, or the one who forgets the meaning of humanity despite all his diplomas?" The hall fell silent again. Schiff clenched his jaw, realizing he had awakened something far bigger than an argument. Traoré leaned back in his seat, but his story was just beginning, and those in the room and millions who would later see the video would never forget what came next. Traoré leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "Let me tell you a story," he said. The journalists perked up. Pens hovered over notepads. Cameras focused closer. He began slowly like a teacher speaking to children. "When I was a boy, my mother used to walk miles to fetch water. One day, she collapsed under the weight of the container. I was only 12, barefoot, hungry, but I carried that water on my head all the way home." His voice tightened, but he did not falter. "That night, I promised her that no child of Burkina Faso would grow without dignity. That promise has guided me more than any university could." The room grew heavy with emotion. A woman in the second row wiped tears from her eyes. Even hardened diplomats lowered their gaze as though ashamed. Traoré's eyes locked on Schiff once more. "Do you see, Congressman? Wisdom is not in the classroom alone. It is in the struggle, the sacrifice, the fire that forges leaders." The audience sat frozen. The insult that began as laughter had now turned into trembling silence. Something in the air had shifted forever. The hall remained frozen. Traoré's words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. No one dared to clap. No one dared to interrupt. Schiff tried to shift his papers, but the rustle only made the silence sharper. Traoré's voice dropped lower, almost like a whisper. "Congressman, do you know what it means to study by the light of a candle that barely burns? To wake at dawn, not to catch a school bus, but to chase goats before you can learn a single letter." Some heads bowed. He was no longer just speaking to Schiff. He was speaking to the entire world, to every child who had ever been told they were not enough. My teachers had no blackboards, only their voices. And my mother's strength was my first textbook. That kind of knowledge cannot be erased, not even by ridicule in this room. A sudden sound of sniffles echoed from the audience. A diplomat pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. A journalist dropped his pen, staring in awe. The power of Traoré's story wasn't just in the words, but in the truth behind them, and it was only the beginning. Traoré took a deep breath and continued. His tone softened, but his words cut deeper. I remember one day in school, he said. A boy sat beside me, his stomach growling. He had eaten nothing for 2 days. Our teacher asked him to read, but he fainted before he could finish the sentence. A gasp escaped from the crowd. Schiff's eyes flickered uneasy. I shared my only piece of bread with him that day. That moment taught me that leadership is not about how many books you have read, but how much of your bread you are willing to share. The hall was silent except for the sound of quiet tears from the back rows. Even some of Schiff's colleagues looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Traoré looked around the hall, his gaze piercing yet calm. You see, Congressman, my lessons did not come from polished classrooms. They came from hunger, from pain, from sacrifice. These lessons stay in the heart, not just in the head. The audience was no longer watching a political debate. They were witnessing the raw, unshakable truth of a man forged in struggle, and his voice was about to grow even stronger. Traoré paused, then slowly rolled up his sleeve. The room gasped as the cameras caught the mark of an old wound etched across his arm. This, he said, pointing to the scar, was my university. I was 18 when rebels attacked my village. I had no diploma, no training, only courage. I stood with the others to defend our homes. This scar is my certificate written in blood and sacrifice. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe the weight of his words. He raised his chin, voice steady. You see, Congressman, education is not measured by the language of textbooks alone. It is measured by the scars you carry, the burdens you bear, and the promises you keep to your people. A journalist's camera clicked, capturing the exact moment when Schiff lowered his eyes. No longer smirking, the crowd was trembling with emotion. It wasn't just a political meeting anymore. It was history being written before their eyes, and every second of it was being recorded, soon to spread across every corner of the world. The lights in the hall seemed softer now, as if the weight of the moment had changed the very air. Traoré lowered his sleeve and looked out at the audience. His eyes, calm but piercing, carried the weight of millions of unheard voices. My mother, he began again, had hands so rough they looked like bark from, carrying water and firewood. She never sat in a classroom, but her wisdom shaped me more than any professor could. His voice wavered slightly, not from weakness, but from memory. One night when I wanted to give up school because I was too tired and too hungry, she held my face in her hands and said, "Son, education is not a certificate. Education is the fire inside you that no one can put out." The hall went silent again. Some audience members pressed their lips together, holding back tears. Schiff sat still, his earlier arrogance dissolving into discomfort. Her words, Traoré whispered, are the reason I stand here today. If that makes me uneducated, then let the world know my mother was my first and greatest university. The crowd erupted in applause, not of politics, but of shared humanity. As the applause softened, Traoré raised his hand for silence. His expression grew heavier, more somber. I once had a friend, he said, a boy from my village named Musa. He was smarter than me. He could read faster, memorize longer, and dream bigger. But one day, he had to drop out of school because his parents couldn't afford even a pencil. The audience shifted uneasily. They could feel where this was going. Musa became a laborer, carrying bricks on his back before he was even 15. His dreams were crushed by poverty, not by lack of intelligence. A pause. His voice broke just slightly. 2 years later, he collapsed at a construction site and never woke up. Gasps filled the room. Schiff lowered his gaze, unable to meet Traoré's eyes. "You see, Congressman," Traoré continued softly, "it is not the children who fail school. It is the world that fails them. And when we mock their lack of diplomas, we are mocking the poverty that killed their dreams." By now, the hall was trembling with emotion. Even seasoned politicians wiped their eyes. The story was no longer about politics. It was about humanity's forgotten children. The weight of Traoré's words lingered. Then something unexpected happened. From the back row, a young African student stood up and began clapping. His eyes were wet, his hands trembling. The sound echoed across the chamber. Then another student rose, clapping harder. Within seconds, half the room was on their feet. The applause grew thunderous, not as a formality, but as a cry of recognition. Schiff looked around, stunned, as the world he thought he controlled slipped from his hands. Traoré did not smile. He simply bowed his head, accepting the applause not for himself, but for the millions of Musas who never lived to see this day. When the clapping finally quieted, he raised his hand again. His voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "This moment will not be remembered because of an insult," he said. "It will be remembered because truth was spoken. And truth, Congressman, does not need a degree to stand tall." The cameras flashed, capturing what would soon spread like wildfire across the internet. But deep inside the room, everyone knew the most powerful part of his story was yet to come. The applause faded into silence once more. Traoré's eyes glowed with memories too heavy for most to carry. He leaned slightly forward, and the hall instinctively leaned with him. "There was a night," he said, "when I was still a boy. Rebels raided our village. We had no light, no food, only fear. My little sister clung to me, trembling. We hid under the bed while gunshots filled the night." The audience stiffened, some holding their breath. "My father, he did not come back that night." His voice broke for the first time, raw with memory. "I buried him with my own hands before the sun rose. I was only 13. A few diplomats covered their mouths in shock. Schiff looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "That night," Congressman Traoré continued, "I learned something no school could ever teach me. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the strength to stand when everything else has fallen." Tears now rolled freely down many faces in the audience. The story was no longer political. It was deeply human, a scar etched into the soul of a nation. And he was not finished. The camera zoomed closer, capturing every word, every flicker of emotion on Traoré's face. His next words cut deeper than a knife. "When I joined the military, I did not even have proper boots. My shoes had holes. My feet blistered, but I still marched. Every step reminded me of the people I carried on my back. My mother, my sister, my village." He paused, and his gaze fell on Schiff once more. "Do you know what it is to lead men when your own stomach is empty? To fight not for medals or titles, but so a child you may never meet can one day sleep in peace." The silence was unbearable. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. "Education," Traoré continued firmly, "is not only in libraries. It is in the battlefield, in the market, in the tears of widows and the hunger of children. If I had waited for diplomas before defending my people, my country would no longer exist." The words struck like thunder. Even those who once doubted him now stared in awe. The young president had turned pain into power, scars into lessons, and the hall knew this was not a speech. It was testimony. A woman in the audience suddenly sobbed aloud, unable to contain herself. The sound spread like a ripple, and soon others followed, their tears freely streaming. Even seasoned diplomats, trained to keep their composure, were shaking. Traoré's tone remained steady, yet every word shattered walls inside people's hearts. "Congressman," he said, his voice firm but calm, "if being educated means forgetting the cries of the poor, then I pray I never have such an education. If it means looking down on those who struggle, then I prefer the lessons of the village, the lessons of pain, of love, of sacrifice." The cameras panned across the room. Schiff sat frozen, pale, unable to respond. His insult now seemed smaller than dust. Traoré closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed strength. "I am not here to defend myself. I am here to speak for the children carrying water under the burning sun, for the mothers with hands like stone, for the mooses of this world who died before their time." The audience erupted into another wave of applause, louder, longer, unstoppable, and deep inside. Everyone knew history had just been made. Traoré reached into his pocket and slowly pulled out a small folded cloth. He placed it gently on the table before him. Cameras zoomed in. It was a piece of the Burkina Faso flag, worn and faded. "This," he said softly, "is from the coffin of a soldier I once buried. He was younger than me, barely 19. He died protecting his village from men with guns far stronger than his. Before he was lowered into the earth, his mother cut a piece of our flag and pressed it into my hand." The room fell utterly silent. Every diplomat leaned forward as though the fabric itself carried a sacred weight. "She told me," Traoré continued, his voice shaking now, "do not let his death be in vain. Carry this flag in your heart, even when the world laughs at you." He held it up, the lights reflecting off his damp eyes. "This cloth has taught me more than any classroom ever could. It reminds me that leadership is not about how much you know, but how much you are willing to sacrifice." The audience was still breathless. Even Schiff could not look up. Traoré paused, then continued with a story that pierced even deeper. "Not long ago," he said, "I visited a camp where children who lost their parents to war were gathered. One little girl, no older than 6, tugged at my sleeve. She held a piece of bread so small it could not feed even a bird. She broke it in two and said, 'Take this, sir. You look tired.' A wave of sobs swept through the hall. People tried to hide their tears, but they couldn't. I could not eat it," Traoré confessed, his voice trembling. "I hugged her and cried instead. That day I realized wisdom is not measured in words spoken in parliaments, but in the generosity of a hungry child." The silence afterward was unbearable. Schiff sat frozen, his earlier insult now drowned under the weight of truth too heavy to deny. Traoré looked straight into the cameras. "So yes, Congressman, if you call me uneducated, then I accept it. But remember this, the most powerful lessons in life are taught not by books, but by the broken, the hungry, and the innocent." The audience was not just listening anymore. They were weeping. The hall had become a sea of tears. Yet Traoré stood strong, his voice steady. "Education is not a shield against arrogance," he said, "nor is it a license to belittle others. True education is when your heart bends low enough to lift the weak. That, Congressman, is the education the world is starving for." The crowd rose to its feet, thunderous applause filling the chamber. Some clapped through tears, others simply placed their hands on their hearts. The students in the back wept openly, whispering his name like a prayer. Schiff sat speechless, staring at his notes as though words had abandoned him. Traoré did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He stood there quietly, letting the truth settle like heavy rain on thirsty soil. Then he added one final line, calm but devastating. "I may not have studied in your universities, Congressman, but I have studied in the University of Life, and that education is one no man can take away." The applause roared again, shaking the walls. Cameras captured every second. The world would see this, and the world would never forget. The applause thundered, but then slowly faded into silence again. This time, no one moved. The air was heavy, as though the entire room was holding its breath. Traoré placed his hands on the table, steady as stone. "I speak not for myself," he said, voice calm but commanding. "I speak for the forgotten, the farmer who tills the soil with cracked hands, the soldier who dies without glory, the mother who sells her last grain so her child can live another day." His voice trembled, but it carried power. "These people, they are my teachers. Their suffering is my textbook. Their resilience is my diploma. And every scar I carry is my graduation." A hush fell so deep that even the clicking of cameras stopped. Schiff sat still, his face pale, stripped of arrogance. The hall was no longer just a conference room. It had become a classroom, and Ibrahim Traoré was the teacher delivering a lesson the world would never forget. And everyone knew the most powerful words were still to come. Traoré's eyes swept across the room, pausing at the students in the back who had started the first applause. "Young people," he said gently, "never that you are less because your school has no walls or because your books are torn. The greatest library in the world is inside your heart." A girl in the front row covered her face, sobbing. Others whispered, "Yes," under their breath as though receiving a sacred truth. Then Traoré turned, facing Schiff directly. His words were sharp yet merciful. "Congressman, you called me uneducated, but tell me, what is worse, a man who lacks a certificate, or a man who has forgotten the value of humanity?" The room shook. Gasps erupted. Schiff lowered his gaze, unable to answer. Traoré's voice softened again. "I do not seek to shame you. I seek to remind you leadership is not about diplomas, but about compassion, and compassion is the highest form of education." The room erupted into standing ovation, louder than ever before. Tears streamed down faces everywhere. History had just been written. The applause thundered endlessly. Some hugged, some cried openly, some simply stood in awe. Journalists scrambled to capture every word, every tear. Cameras flashed, recording the moment that would within hours circle the globe. Traoré, however, simply bowed his head. His humility made the moment even greater. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for every child, every mother, every forgotten soul whose story had been buried in silence. When the crowd finally calmed, he ended with a single sentence. "True education is not in the mind alone. It is in the heart that refuses to give up on its people." The hall exploded once more in applause, shaking the walls. Schiff sat defeated, but even he could not deny the truth. Within minutes, the clips began trending online. Hashtags exploded. Millions wept behind their screens. The young leader from Burkina Faso had not only silenced a critic, he had taught the world a lesson it desperately needed. And in that moment, Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just a president. He was a symbol of hope. Now, my dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which part of Traoré's words moved you the most. Let us spread his message.